In 1823, President James Monroe drew an invisible line around this hemisphere and told Europe to stay out. He called it the Monroe Doctrine, and on paper, it sounded defensive. No new colonies, no foreign empires in the Americas. President Theodore Roosevelt refined these ideas and created what is known as the Roosevelt Corollary. He claimed that when Latin American nations fell into chronic wrongdoings or financial disorder, the United States has not just the right, but a duty to interfere as international police power. The Roosevelt Corollary was the link between Monroe's 19th century warning and today's hard-edged American First strategy in Latin America. Today, in Donald Trump's second term, these have been reborn under a new name, the Monroe Doctrine and the Trump Corollary. This documentary argues that they do not offer a break from the past, but a revived, more aggressive version of Monroe's ideas and Roosevelt's tactics, using 21st century power to enforce the same claim of U.S. dominance over the Americas. James Monroe, amid post-Napoleonic fears, declared the Western Hemisphere off-limits to Europe. Secretary John Quincy Adams crafted the core: no new colonies, no interventions in independent states. As scholars at the Institute of World Politics point out, the Monroe Doctrine began as notion more than an idea, with no troops or fleet to enforce it. Its real force came from the British Navy, which happened to share Washington's interest in keeping other European powers out of the Americas. Officials like Theodore Roosevelt turned Monroe's cautious words into justification for U.S. dominance, claiming that American flag is law on the continent. Roosevelt claimed that this was about stability and civilization, but it also meant Washington could decide when a neighbor was unstable and then occupy it without asking.
It wasn't a pronouncement of law or statute. It was simply a statement made by a president to Congress about what foreign powers could not do in the Western Hemisphere. That's it.
It was decades before that statement would be ordained a doctrine and invoked by President James K. Polk to justify war with Mexico and expand the U.S. by nearly half. Cut to 1904, and President Teddy Roosevelt brandishing his big stick and proclaiming his own corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
He's the key figure. And when Roosevelt looks at the Caribbean and Central America, he sees instability. He sees concerns that the European rivals might intervene. And he says in order to prevent that from happening, the United States needed to take preemptive action of its own.
Is part of the justification, well, we kept the Europeans out of this hemisphere, so you have to keep your house in order or we'll do it for you?
That's very much how Roosevelt put it.
The Marines return to the trouble spot, this time in force.
Enter the U.S. Marines, who by the 1920s were boots on the ground in half a dozen Latin American and Caribbean countries, attempting to stabilize them and, this is crucial, protect U.S. business interests, from bananas in Honduras to banks in Haiti. But these occupations soon became bloody quagmires, with hundreds of military and tens of thousands of civilian casualties.
They're known as the Banana Wars. These are the forever wars of their era. They begin to become very, very unpopular.
The Banana Wars ended with U.S. withdrawal from Haiti in 1934. After World War II, the Monroe Doctrine was barely mentioned.
Constitutes an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas.
In 1962, when the Soviets sent missiles into Cuba, President John F. Kennedy had this to say.
He said, "The Monroe Doctrine, what the hell is that?"
But now it's back. Since last week's incursion into Venezuela, President Trump has cloaked his foreign policy in a once again revived Monroe Doctrine.
Monroe Doctrine, we sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore.
With this, the doctrine was invoked again during the Cold War, from Guatemala to Cuba, to the broadened struggle to keep Soviet influence out of the Western Hemisphere. In 2013, Secretary of State John Kerry told the Organization of American States that the era of the Monroe Doctrine is over, signaling a break with nearly 2 centuries of hemispheric dominance. Some observers treated this as the official death certificate of Monroe's idea, but as foreign policy scholars suggest, doctrines rarely disappear so fast. In 2018, National Security Advisor John Bolton openly revived the name, insisting that his administration was not afraid to use the words Monroe Doctrine. The stage was set for a more aggressive reinterpretation under Donald Trump's return to the White House. In early 2025, a New York tabloid showed a photograph of President Trump pointing at a classroom map of the Western Hemisphere. The headline read, "The Monroe Doctrine." On the map, Canada was relabeled the 51st state, Greenland as our land, and the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. By the end of that year, commentators in major newspapers were calling 2025 the year of the Monroe Doctrine. They described a pattern: trade wars with Canada and Mexico, symbolic renamings, renewed interest in acquiring Greenland, and a muscular posture toward Venezuela, all tied together by the ambition to reassert U.S. primacy in the Americas.
Core principles of American foreign policy dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Monroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again.
In this new doctrine, Trump's team explicitly framed the Western Hemisphere as a zone where American power must block rivals like China and Russia from gaining footholds, especially in strategic sectors such as energy and infrastructure. Analysts see this as a 21st century echo of Monroe's original warning against European intrusion, updated for a world of great power competition. The connection between the Monroe Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine is not accidental. In its own national security messaging, the Trump administration has described a Trump corollary and pledged to reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe label wraps this strategy in a catchy, media-driven brand.
I think this is a dramatically new step. I mean, the United States had, for a very long period of time, been very keen to welcome as migrants educated elites with lots of human capital for its own economic interests.
But isn't the risk, though, that actions like this would just increase migration to America?
It's absolutely clear that wherever the United States has chosen to intervene, these regions have yielded refugees.
But maybe the most significant shift here is the rhetoric, the posturing.
Trump has essentially shorn all that idealism from the Monroe Doctrine and said it's really all about the United States taking whatever it wants in the hemisphere.
Really it's the language of colonialism.
There is no pretense here to talk about democracy or sovereignty at all.
None whatsoever.
Scholars of American foreign policy argue that both doctrines revolve around the same core principle, that the U.S. claims a special right to shape outcomes in its hemisphere and shut the door on outside powers. What has changed is the balance of power and the tools from the 9th century diplomatic notes and the British backing to the 21st century sanctions, trade leverage, and targeted military operations. The revival from Monroe to Monroe raises old questions in new form. For Latin American communities, it can look like one more chapter in a long history of outside control. For Washington, it is presented as a necessary shield against rivals and instability in its neighborhood. 2 centuries after James Monroe sketched a paper boundary against European empires, Donald Trump has tried to redraw that boundary with bolder lines and a louder name. Whether the Monroe Doctrine becomes another long-term pillar of the U.S. foreign policy or a cautionary footprint will depend on how the hemisphere responds to this latest claim of American dominance.